Today I'm here with Jim Feil, who's an instructor in the online school, is also an instructor around the world, and he'll be bringing a course coming in a couple weeks called Early Developmental Dynamics Foundations for Building Relational and Resonant Skills in Therapy. And Jim, please go ahead with what you wanted to share today.
Great, thank you, Kate. So I just like to talk a little bit about this course, right? Which on one level sounds like it's about basic and fundamental skills and orientations in early developmental dynamics, resonant and relational skills, and precise mirroring. And one could think about that as kind of bread and butter kinds of concepts and skills. But I really see it as a way to open up really new territory within the therapeutic community and the therapeutic work. That the way I understand these is that they are really fundamental bricks that you can build on extensively. And they open new doorways that other methodologies may not, and also nuance the work that many people already do. So the course is really set up for something that established practitioners can use, as well as to inspire more early practitioners and to see possibilities that may interest them that they haven't seen before. So, when we're working with people, there are a couple of just fundamental questions that every level of practitioner has to deal with, which is what's really going on with this client, right? And from that question, then you can go off in so many different directions, depending on what you're studied and what your orientation is, But what is really going on here? And then, of course, the second question is, how do I want and need to respond to this, right? And these are the two fundamental issues that everybody is dealing with more or less sophistication. Yeah. Now, it's very interesting. Fritjof Capra, whom some of you may remember from the Tao of Physics and other very interesting books on the merger of science and spirituality and so forth. He once said that there are basically two fundamental organismic processes that we need to understand well. One is the regulation process, regulatory processes. And he said the other one is formative processes, formation, forming. And, from what I can see in the modern environment, the last 10, 20 years, really there's been so much work done around regulation, self-regulation, co-regulation. The whole trauma world, we might call trauma speak, is really about the regulatory processes. Once things have been seriously disturbed, how do you re-regulate and reestablish autonomic balance and so forth? And you don't hear very much about formativeness, for what I would call formative speak. And this is, I think, it's related, obviously, to regulatory process, but it's got its own language, and I think it all opens very interesting doorways that you don't get to with other approaches, and there's something called the long body. When you're thinking about formativeness, the long body is this body that we have lived in from the moment of conception until end of life, and all the different bodies we have been through, all, from embryological to infant to toddler and adolescent and so forth, the long body. And of course, there's a whole program dimension. This is a programmed process to a great extent, obviously affected by the environment and many things, but this formative cycle, which is talked about as a developmental cycle. But when you talk about it as a formative cycle, you're dealing with other dimensions of this formative process, not just the psychological development, but literally bringing an anatomy and biology as well. So anyway, so this is a little bit, we're going to do a little bit of formative speak. As a way into our work. Now, we talked about mirroring and resonance and relational skills, more resonance and relational in the title, but precise mirroring. And most people think of precise mirroring as kind of a, a basic skill where we reflect back more kind of surface layers and expressions with people. We create rapport, we create pacing, we send back simple messages that mirror back simple messages that are useful. But it turns out that the mirroring process can be much more nuanced and much more sophisticated, that it's possible to reflect back, if you have the skill and the orientation, many layers of the person's experience, much more complex process that is often thought about in mirroring. Of course, we're mirroring back content of the story. We're mirroring back feeling and emotion. We're mirroring back certain unarticulated or unconscious organizations in that person. We're mirroring back many layers of signaling that the person is putting out and which people normally don't get. And so we as therapists respond to this signaling, these bids for attention. Yeah. But where we in formative work, we even focus on a couple of more that are very powerful. One is just the motor expressions, which of course a lot of people do work with. But for us, we work with the motor dimension in a much more really precise and extended way. And there's a very nice, simple little phrase that comes out of one researcher's work, which is, he just says that movement and gesture clarify in cortical intent. It's just such a simple statement, but there's so much in it, that movement clarifies cortical intent, right? There is no movement that obviously isn't kind of innervated by sensory motor images, and sensory motor images have purpose, they have intention. They're doing something for the organism, but much of the time we don't know what it is. We just are moving. Some of our movements are voluntary and chosen, and many aren't. And so we do a lot of mirroring and work with the motor dimension of storytelling. So that's a very powerful, and even though people work with motor in many ways, we work with it in a very special way, built around the work of Stanley Kellerman, whose work, formative psychology, is somewhat known. A final kind of element that we mirror back is what's called the primary life pulse, right? This is a material that comes out of craniosacral biodynamics, polarity therapy, even other Chinese medicine. Obviously, the pulse is really, if you have a pulse, you're alive. If you don't have a pulse, forget it, you're somewhere else. And there are many levels of pulse. And we're not doing it so much in a Chinese medicine way where we're touching the pulse, but there is a sense of an energetic life pulse, which we also track. But, we track all of these different dimensions, and that gives us a very rich mirroring return flow conversation with the person and a lot of their organismic processes. And it is amazing what happens when you engage in that way. So this is I think an entry into a powerful somatic orientation, but which is formative. And then something else we add, I think hopefully it's a lot, hopefully it's okay for people, but we also add a whole kind of informational dimension, because basically change happens. For change to happen, the system needs information, right? If you don't get new information, the system's going to do things the same old way. And so there's a focus on information. Of course, information is a topic that's been developed not just in information tech, but informational processes, how information works, how the brain processes information. And so there's a lot more to tracking the nervous system. As wonderful as tracking the autonomic nervous system is, and the great, kind of the great usefulness of the polyvagal nervous system theory, there are many other ways to track the nervous system, which are very powerful and very interesting. And so we do some of that in our mirroring as well. So ultimately, this work supports the unfolding. When we're thinking about formativeness, it supports the unfolding of the program dimension of our form, the genetic and so forth, development that's going to happen no matter what. And then it also supports the emergent development of our system, which is the emergence of the new, of the creative, of the unprogrammed, because that's also part of form and forming. Anyway, and so when we respond to our life situation, because that's what we're doing at every moment, these are all elements of effective behavior, effective responding to life situations, everything from challenges to opportunities, and building our form in an ever more complex and effective way so that we can deal with life. And so that's the idea of, that's the idea of the course, right? So we're going to look at, again, back to the early developmental dynamics of forming, which really set the scene for resonant, relational, and mirroring skills. So some of the sources that I use, just to kind of complete this quick summary. Stanley Kellerman, as I mentioned, is one of the great somatic pioneers, developed his whole vision of formative psychology. People know about him and some have studied with him, but if you haven't studied with him in the last 10 years of his career and life, he developed so many nuances that have been really useful and inspiring to me. And then another important source is Daniel Stern. I'm not sure how many people have probably heard of him. I'm not sure how many people have maybe tracked his last couple of books, The Present Moment, Forms of Vitality. Very interesting material for therapists. And then those are kind of the practitioners that are primary sources. And then I have, I use different research materials, and some of the names haven't been named in the trauma world and in modern therapeutic kind of structuring, but they're very, very interesting. Rudolfo Linus, neurophysiologist, who has amazing things to say about motricity, which support Kellerman's view of motricity. Mark Taylor has written a beautiful book on complexity and complexity theory and how that's important and useful in our work. A man named Paul Davies has developed the whole idea of life as information. And so these are three of kind of the scientific background that I bring in, and we make use of it in the course. And of course, the course is meant to be highly practical. There is, of course, a kind of a theoretical conceptual frame, but the whole idea is to build skills that work for our clients and take them deeper, more quickly, more efficiently, and more safely. And then, of course, pre and perinatal, cranial biodynamics, pluritherapy have all been part of my background. Anyway, that's a quick view of what we'll be doing over this 3-day course, starting on the 20th. And anyway, obviously, you are invited.
You are. It'll be so fun to be with you again, Jim. And
Great.
for those of you listening, we start October 20th until the 22nd. It's a 3-day course online.
Great. Thank you.